All right, everybody. My first virtual global design talk interview by btrax. And I'm super excited to be talking to my friend Michelle Lipira. She's a design manager on the Adobe Fonts team
Hmm.
and is now based in the San Diego area.
Hmm.
Um, Michelle, why don't you just let's kick it off. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hi everyone. Michelle, design manager of the Adobe Fonts team. You might be asking, well, what does that actually mean? And so the Fonts team was originally Typekit, if you guys remember that. And so that was an acquisition through Adobe a few years ago. So essentially, we're kind of a mix of a few different businesses. We're a foundry itself. We also manage
Okay.
the business of foundries. And then we also are in charge of innovation in terms of typography, along with the UX of type and fonts within all of our Adobe Creative Cloud applications on top of Acrobat and Document Cloud. You can edit that. But I've been at Adobe for at this point now 5.5 years. I've worked on yeah, my previous projects were all horizontally based. So I was never working on a specific product like a Photoshop, Illustrator, or InDesign. All the projects and products I had worked on at Adobe all span across essentially all of the applications, which is a very interesting team to be on at Adobe because it's predominantly a vertical product company, and that's how it's
Mhm.
structurally set up. But ever since they went to subscription, applications need to play nice with each other. That's kind of a new business model within Adobe Design that's been introduced in the last few years. And we have been continually working out the kinks and figuring out how to be the most efficient working horizontally in a predominantly vertical company, if that makes sense.
Got it. That
Yeah.
totally it makes sense to me. A
Yeah.
couple of questions that maybe somebody would be listening and be like, "Oh, what does that mean?" Can you explain what a foundry is?
Yes. So a foundry is a business. They're the ones that actually design the fonts. And
Mhm.
so that's their job. And they can be as small as a one-person foundry to a huge foundry company like a Monotype that has multiple foundries within that foundry, and they produce and they work with a lot of individual font designers.
Okay, awesome. That was a great explanation. Thank you for that. Prior to Adobe, what were you doing?
Yes. So right before Adobe, I was working at GoPro. I was there for about 6 years. And so I had worked on the UI UX of the camera itself. So I started with Hero 3 and then worked on Hero
Mhm.
3 Plus, Hero 4. Hero 5 was kind of like that was my baby. I worked on that product from concept all the way to shipping, which actually took a total of 3 years because it was just so wildly different than what was previously designed. It was the first GoPro
Mhm.
camera that did not need a casing to be waterproof. The camera itself was waterproof, so that had a lot of it just introduced a lot more problems that we had not accounted for because we had never done anything like that before. And then I worked all the way up to Hero 6 and Hero 7. And then I worked on a few different products as well, on top of creating a team to essentially develop a style guide for all of GoPro design in terms of whether it's the app or the mobile app going
Yep.
into the actual camera and trying to reference and utilize the design style of our website and any of our other collateral. Before, the teams were all very different and siloed, and so we were trying to
Mhm.
get everyone using the same typeface and same type of style, color palette, and things like
Yeah.
that. Because GoPro, when I had started in 2013, it was just on the verge of getting very big. So it was just hiring a lot of people fast and furiously trying to build, build, build. And when you're part of a smaller company that's in a very build mode, a lot of things
Yep.
are not in place. So you're kind of, we used to say we're changing the wheels of a tire as the car is still moving.
Got it. And so at GoPro, you were involved with everything from actual product design
Yeah.
to online experiences, the mobile,
Yeah.
FAQs, like
Yeah.
anything that touched product.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I was on the product team. I sat next to engineering and product designers. And the cool thing about working with the GoPro camera, which I had had experience on, because my previous experience to GoPro was at Motorola for about 6 years, is really working with an actual physical product. So working
Mhm.
on a software side of a physical product just introduces a whole other different realm of complexity in terms of
Yeah.
ergonomics, how you actually hold the camera. Like with GoPro, I would do my own testing where I would literally go jump in the pool, or I took a camera out on the slopes when I was snowboarding to see, like, can I see these colors when the sun is shining on the screen? What colors, what in terms of legibility and contrast, and can I do what I need to do when I'm in the
Mhm.
moment of trying to do something epic, which is what we used to say. Whether I'm diving, I'm snowboarding, I'm surfing, I need to be able to quickly do something, whether it's by a physical touch or by looking and
Mhm.
interacting with the screen, which was just always fun.
Wow.
I can't believe that was still my
That's
job.
everything you just described. Sounds fun.
It
Um,
was. I mean, I had it on my bike all the time when I was in
yep.
triathlon, like swim, bike, run. I was using that GoPro all the time, constantly testing your own product. And that was,
Yeah.
I remember, like in design reviews with Nick Woodman, our CEO. And he's just like, wow, you're really eating your own dog food. I was like, if the designer's not testing your own product and we're the one evangelizing
Mhm.
this, then we're not doing our jobs.
Got it. And so your role at GoPro sound, especially working across, like going from being very siloed
Mhm.
to establishing kind of a better process or to work across departments, it kind of sets you up for the Adobe Fonts team
Mhm.
and kind of adding value around like how do we take something that's historically vertical and the
Mhm.
conversations and applying that.
Mhm.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then even
And
bringing it back a little farther to like my first job out of college at Motorola, like this
mhm,
dates me when I started working as a mobile designer before that was even a term. Like the iPhone wasn't even invented yet. And so this is when flip
yeah,
phones were still cool and everyone had the Motorola Razor. And then just designing iconography and designing UI for a flip phone that had a lot to do with the physical phone you're actually holding and how you can actually interact with stuff, generally just your thumb, because there wasn't a lot of,
mhm,
wasn't even touch at that point. You're just using the keypad. But
right.
then that was my first introduction really into dealing with the global audience, because we didn't have scalable um, designs at that point. You had to design a specific
Mm,
design for Latin text, you had to design one for Arabic, and then we had to work with a little bit differently in terms of Chinese and Japanese text, because that's when I really started to learn just the different realms of type and fonts and dialects and how that all works with UI UX design. So it's funny how my career's kind of like come full circle in terms of being on a silo product to being more of a
yep,
horizontal, establishing processes, and then also integrating um, essentially global language into a product, whether that's just
right.
localization and then also being culturally aware of how to design products.
So you went from college, you graduated, and then you started working in a product or something that basically, like, how do you, like, there was no, like you said, mobile design
No,
role,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah,
how did you adjust for that? How did you kind of
yeah.
like
I
kick
needed a
that off?
job. I needed a job with insurance. That's like the real, I mean, very real. I literally just had a
Yeah,
mentor conversation yesterday. He's like, "How did you know to pick your first job?" And I was like, "I needed a job. It had insurance."
yeah,
And my classmate had just gotten a contract job with Motorola, and it was across the street from where I went to college. So it was just kind of serendipitous, I guess you can say. And
mhm,
not what I was actually looking for, but I had the perspective of just being open to what I didn't know.
yeah,
And so that's how I landed in that place. And then I'm just loyal to a fault. And so there was just something about that industry of like working with mobile phones at that time.
mhm,
This is now circa 2006. There was so much ambiguity and it wasn't clear of like even trying to describe what I'm doing to my classmates and previous classmates and people. They're like, "What are you doing?" And it's just like, I don't know. There was just something kind of cool about seeing people with a flip phone on the bus, knowing that like I worked on that product. Like there was something kind of
yeah,
cool to actually see a tangible product that I had a lot of impact on. And then I just continued to stay. And then essentially 2 years later, the iPhone came out and then the industry changed and it was
yeah.
too exciting to leave. So I just stayed and stayed, and here we are.
Yes, yes. Well, and you made the decision to move from Chicago to San Francisco.
Yeah.
Was that what? Tell me the reason behind that. Right? It was
Yeah.
because SF
Good.
was obviously a mecca for technology
Yeah.
at the time.
So yeah, so this is, I don't even know if you know this, John. So I had a hiatus actually. Before I went from in between going from Chicago to San Francisco, I actually lived in Rome, Italy for 3 months. So when I was at Motorola, I was doing contract work, and it was Chicago. Living downtown was great, but I always kind of had two
Mhm.
dreams. I either wanted, because I studied abroad in Florence, I either wanted to move to Europe and move back to Italy, or I wanted to end up in California.
Mhm.
So back when the recession had hit in 2008, when the housing market burst, I had lost my job. And so at that point, I already had a connection in Italy through my professor in college to let me stay with her and intern curating an art gallery outside
Okay.
of Rome. So I just kind of packed my bags, and then lived in Italy for 3 months trying to figure out how the heck to live there full time and get a job. Long story short, that
Yep.
didn't quite pan out. So then I had to go back to Chicago. I got my job back at Motorola. And so at that point, I knew that I wanted to end up in California. And then that just happened to be the same time Motorola was opening up an office in Sunnyvale. I had never heard of Sunnyvale. And so I was just like, I want to end up in California. And I thought all of California was like the OC. And
Mhm.
so I was very
Oh.
naive and was willing to take a big risk. A theme about me is that I'm willing to take a risk, knowing that
Mhm.
there might not there just trusting my gut that it's going to actually work out without really knowing what it's going to look like. So
Yeah.
that's really how I ended up in San Francisco. It was that the job was in Sunnyvale, and I was like moving from Chicago. I had lived in downtown. I knew I didn't want to live in the suburbs because I was only 25. And so I chose to
Yeah.
live in San Francisco. And I officially took the job before I'd ever even set foot in Northern California. I had only been in like Laguna once when I was like graduated high school. So I
Well,
was like,
I
I'm gonna
mean,
live
it's
in San Francisco. And they're like, you've never been there. I'm like, it's California. It's gonna be great.
yeah.
And then I moved.
And I think some of the things that have probably made you a successful, not just designer, but successful in life, is your curiosity, right? And
Yes.
like your openness to change and trying new things. And I think like those traits make you a better designer too, right? Like there's a sense of empathy.
Yeah.
There's a level of empathy that based off of having lived abroad and even tried to move abroad at some point.
Mm,
And it made it easier to move from someplace that you
yeah.
grew up, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, you did a study abroad, and maybe you lived in Rome for like 3 months, but really you spent every other waking moment living in Chicago
Yeah. And
before
then
moving to California.
totally. But then also too, another thing that I learned, being from the Midwest in the United States, was that when I tried to live abroad, it was having empathy for people trying to learn a new language. Like
Hmm.
that was my first experience of being like, wow, this is what people are experiencing in the United States. That to me was like very, very, very eye-opening, and just how hard people have to work to make a big move like that from country to country. But yeah, being
Okay, and
curious is definitely a big, big point. And then I always say like the only consistent thing in life is change.
yeah, yeah, that makes yes, that's very true. And so now you're at Adobe, and I feel like your time at Motorola, your time at GoPro, you're focusing on global products or products that were progressing to be a global product.
Yep.
What have been some of the learnings around, working on a global product across different, like the horizontal? Um,
Yeah, you don't know everything. Like, that's for sure. And there is always things to learn, and just to be open, gosh, to be open to feedback, open to other people's perspectives that you might not have been aware of. Be open to your bias and how that shows up in your design. That's
mhm,
a very interesting one. And then just being culturally sensitive and aware to how other people think about things differently, and just being
mhm.
cognizant of when you're designing that you're thinking about that.
Uh, and you thought about that when you were designing. Now you're managing. You're
Yeah.
doing less of the execution of
Yeah.
kind of projects.
Yep.
can you tell me about some of the learnings you've had in managing people? And
Yep.
it's a two-part question. So like, I want to learn about that, but I also want to learn, like, over the last couple of years, you've gone from working in person to either hybrid or remote, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how have you had to adjust from to a different work style?
Yeah. I mean, I can start with just kind of like adjusting from, in person to remote. I always saw myself working in person because I'm a social person. And
Yeah.
then like a lot of people when the pandemic hit, I was just forced to work remote and then kind of
Hmm.
got used to it. And so it's not like like necessarily chose to work remote full time. What I did choose to do was move from San Francisco down to San Diego because I knew ultimately in my heart that's where I wanted to end up. And that was
Yeah.
only possible because we had allowed people to work remote. More
Yeah.
permanently. And so then I applied to work remote because my life down here it shifted. And so this was my new home. And so this was my way to make myself be able to keep my job and live where I wanted to live. And then in terms of like that adjustment, I mean, I'm still adjusting to it. Like it's still
Mhm.
crazy to me constantly seeing people on video and just having my eyes be tired because I'm staring at a screen all day. And our company we're on video all the time. Like I am on video from like
Yeah.
8 in the morning until like 5 o'clock at night. Um, so it's just kind of like being used to that. And then also, um, because I lacked community down here, I established my own San Diego community within Adobe, which hadn't been done yet. So during the pandemic, obviously everyone had felt very isolated. And so I'm someone that likes to bring people together and connect people.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like my personal passion. So I essentially started establishing monthly get-togethers, which essentially grew into a whole pilot program for Adobe to how to
Oh,
build
cool.
community. Yeah, so it's been like how to build a community without having a physical office, and San Diego has
Hmm.
been the pilot program for that. And we've had more and more people move down here, and then also we've had a ton of people who have lived down here that were completely unaware of people living within San Diego. Like I was literally in a meeting an hour ago and they were like, "Oh, you're doing monthly stuff at San Diego? Isn't there like 30 people live down there?" I'm like, "No, about 200." And everyone's like, "What?" No, it's just kind of like it's still every month we're getting people being like, "I've been working here for like 15 years. I had no idea there was a whole community here." So that's kind of like a personal passion of mine. And that's how I get my social
Hmm.
outlet, I guess you can say, is that I get to
Hmm.
meet people at least once a month. And what's extra cool about it is what makes it extra special is that it's not just people on my team, but it's people in
Hmm.
all parts of the business. So it creates a really cool opportunity for me to learn about other parts of the business that I most likely wouldn't have if I would have stayed in an office.
All right. That's awesome. Well, congrats on building that and
Thank
kicking
you.
off kind of the pilot program for it.
Yeah, it's
Um,
been fun. And then question one of how it's how it's been to transition from essentially IC to managing.
mhm.
Um, Yeah, everyone has always told me like managing people is really hard. And I was like, no, like it's gonna be
Yeah.
great. Like I love mentoring. I love working with people. I've been in the industry at this point for over 18 years. I was
Yeah.
ready to learn a new skill and to be challenged. And I always kind of said my interests were transitioning from pixels to people. And so
Hmm.
I've been more interested in how to
Yeah.
develop people as opposed to just kind of doing the design myself. And so that's been a huge learning curve and a really cool opportunity. I have been tested a lot, and things
Yeah.
have come up that I had not anticipated, but it keeps it fresh. And I know that I'm growing and learning because it's stuff I've never had to handle before, which has been really exciting because the last few years, I've really been interested in more of also like the business side of things. And I could never
Hmm.
quite tap into that as an IC designer. So now that I've transitioned into management, I have more insight as to what's going on to the business. And I love trying
Hmm.
to figure out how design can have a direct impact on the business. So I feel like I'm kind of set up differently as I was before to be having a seat at the table, I guess you can say, to be more strategic as opposed to just executing.
And what advice would you have for somebody who is currently an IC or individual contributor, for those of you who don't know, who are interested in that management track?
Oh, just talk to people, have conversations,
Yeah.
and I call them curious conversations, and just
Yep.
get to understand what people have gone through and what are problems that, I mean, any job is just, you're essentially just solving different problems. And are these the problems
Yeah.
that you want to solve? So if you kind of think about it that way, and just kind of like learn from different people's experiences to see if it's a fit for you. And also too, there's been a lot of people that have gone into management and have ultimately
Yeah.
decided, like, not for me. I'm going to go back to IC, and they have. It's very common
Yeah.
actually at Adobe. I don't see myself doing that, but it's
Hmm.
also like nothing's forever. So it's okay to try new things and fail.
Got it. Well, and at Adobe, you have so many different products
Yeah.
that for a designer who wants to be an IC,
Yeah.
like I could see them having the opportunity to work on a lot of different cool projects.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that could be a reason why they go for management and they're like, oh no, I'd rather be kind of like in the weeds of actual designing.
Yeah. I actually think it's
Is
a
it?
reason why people stay at Adobe for so long. So in
Yeah.
tech, it's hard to find people staying at a company in general that's for more than like 5 years. I think 5 years is kind of like
Yeah.
the cap. And so at Adobe, you've got people celebrating 15, 20, 25, 30 years, which is unheard of at this point.
Yeah.
And so it's what makes Adobe, I think, so special is that, yes, it's a very large company, but it provides and actually encourages people to try out different teams. We actually have programs
Mhm.
where a designer can test out being on a different team for 6 months and learn new
Oh.
skills and see if that's something that they would like to do. Where
Mhm.
previously, or my experience before, is if you ever wanted to try something different, you had to quit and find a new job. So Adobe
Yeah.
is really invested in the employee's happiness and growth, that it will
Mhm.
prioritize them being able to try out a few different things for them to find their path, to ultimately have them stay longer because that's better for the business.
Got it. I know we're starting to run low on time, but I wanted to get your thoughts on what advice you give your younger self or somebody just entering, kind of, graduating and just starting their design career.
Yes, I've actually gotten this a few times, and I don't
Awesome.
know if it was really for like myself versus people now, because I think the
Mhm.
times have changed tremendously.
Yeah.
And what I've been realizing with students graduating college, there's such a tremendous pressure to find that perfect job,
Mhm.
that perfect internship. And you have to plan out your whole like career of like, I got to make sure I don't mess up. It's like this
Yeah.
scared of like being like, oh my God, I'm going to mess up. And literally had this
Yeah.
conversation yesterday, and he's like, what? I don't know what to do. And it's like allowing yourself to try out new things, be
Mhm.
curious, do the job that scares you, find the company that you would like just love working for, and cold call somebody, reach out. Who's doing that job? Who's that
Yeah.
agency that's designing that product that you absolutely love? And get to know people. Like, break down those barriers of like these big companies and these big products and these big names, because everyone's just people, and just get to know people and figure out what you want to do, and just realize that you're not going to find that perfect job and that perfect internship. Like, nothing's perfect. So, but everything is an opportunity to learn, and every skill is transferable from one job to another. So thinking about how you want to build your resume and thinking about the skills you want to bring essentially into your career and what kind of tools you want to have in your
Mhm.
toolbox, it just kind of, I think, allows you to have a lot less pressure of trying to
Yeah.
figure out this perfect next step, because it's just like, oh my God, it's debilitating to, I feel like, to a lot of people, where there's just like, oh my gosh, like, it's okay. You're like 24 years old. Like, you really don't know a lot. And that's what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be trying
Yeah.
out, because you're not going to know what you need to know ultimately to figure
Mhm.
out exactly where you want to go. Like, life happens. Nothing's guaranteed.
Yeah.
So you got to learn how to like go for what you want. Don't be scared. You're going to fail, and that means you're trying. So that's a
Yeah.
good thing.
That's great advice. Even whether we're talking to somebody who's just coming out of college, or even like somebody like me who's also figuring out what he wants to do when he grows up. But this was super fun to talk with you. If somebody's interested in kind of connecting with you, or
Yes.
what would be the best way?
On LinkedIn, please.
LinkedIn. All right, and we'll share your LinkedIn contact information And yeah, and I had some other questions around design communities, but I'll be honest, like
Yeah.
I think that the answers are probably different around like when you started design in Chicago versus when you
Yeah.
moved to San Francisco versus San Diego during COVID. You know,
Yeah.
I think, it sounds like short answer is you've been able to create, to work with, to support design communities wherever you happen to be in the way that you wanted to, and you were able to add value to, and just support people. I think that's the curiosity, the empathy that kind of I'll call it the Michelle-ness has been
Fun for me.
kind of like, yeah, it's been great. So thank you again for joining this interview today.
You're welcome.
I'd like to just invite everybody who's watching this to please like, subscribe, comment, all the fun things that we ask you to do when checking out YouTube videos. So thank you again, Michelle, and I look forward to catching up again soon.
I know. Thank you so much.